do what God calls them to do. It's that important. Do you think it would have been more difficult for Becky? Mm-hmm. Without Albert there? Sure. And just think, they get the same reward. They get the same reward. See, you don't think so? Well, let's go back to Revelation. Amen. You look throughout the Bible. They're one. We're one, folks, whether you realize it or not. As a church, we are one. We are one. And we're only as effective as each one puts in. Each part of the body, Ephesians chapter 4, talks about each part of the body supplying what the body needs. And we become stronger by that. But it has to be without any selfish will. It has to be out of a heart of love to serve one another because we love others. We love other people. Amen. That's the key. But you see how important it is? It doesn't make any difference what your job is in the church, if you want to call it that. The most important thing is to have a relationship with Jesus and to function in that job, to do the job that God has called you to do. And when you do that, your reward is as great as anyone else. You are a 100-fold Christian at that point. Amen? It's not 30, 60, 100-fold measured by miracles and that. And I'll take you back to Matthew 6, and it says that they said, some came to him and said, man, we've done all these mighty works in your name. And Jesus said to them, hey, depart from me, I never knew you. So it's knowing Jesus, amen. Better have that one right. And then secondly, it's fulfilling that purpose. You see, that's what the underlying thing is, relationship and service to others, and finding that place where you're to serve others. You know, I've been in different churches, and I've had people, you know, I've pastored a church, and I've had people try to step up and pastor while I was pastoring, who didn't have the gift, who didn't have the talents, and they went and they tried to do things on their own. And obviously I'm not there anymore, but nevertheless, I had God's heart in mind. I had service in mind while I was there, and God honored me for that. Amen. They went and tried to do things. They tried to set up meetings on their own. They didn't go through me, and it just wasn't right, because God has established stewardship of the church through a pastor, through the elders of the church, quote unquote. I know some people interpret that differently. But if you look at the early church and you look at the book of Acts, they came together and decided things. But it was usually the apostolic part of the church. It was usually the apostles that decided, along by the Spirit of God. So, you know, I had people at that church that would try to do things, would try to usurp the pastor's authority. Or they didn't understand the gifts, the talents that God had given the pastor. They tried to take their flesh and run the church, and it got themselves into trouble because of it. Amen? And so too, we have to recognize that while we are free as Christians, there is still the authority and a position of authority that God puts in the church, and we need to be respectful of that. Amen? I have always, no matter what church I'm in and no matter who the pastor is, I have always been respectful of the pastor. I'm just telling you my experience. I have always been respectful of the pastor. I've always submitted myself to the pastor. Amen? And if he asked me to do something, I did it. And I didn't do something outside of him knowing what was going on. That's just wrong, because it's not service. Amen? You learn service. You learn how to serve others by serving the authority in the church. You serve God, yes. You serve Jesus. But also God places leadership in this church. And we need to be aware of that and not thwart the leadership. Because at that point, we're rebellious, we're stubborn, and we're stiff-necked. You learn service, amen, by submitting to Jesus, Him, and He's number one, and also the authority in the church. To go out and to do things contrary and without the authority knowing, without your pastor knowing, without submitting to your pastor is just wrong. I have never done that, and I will never do that. And you shouldn't do that either, because you put yourself in a precarious place. So, regardless of who the pastor is, whether it was Virgil or Jerry, or I sat under Gary for a while, I always served those people that were in the church. I always served those pastors. Whatever they asked me to do, I would do it. Didn't make no difference what my own desires was or what I do what they asked me to do. That is humility, folks. That is serving others. To go and to do it on your own is another thing. You're stepping outside the will of God, and you're in rebellion at that point. So, but I've always found, no matter whether it was Gary, Virgil, Jerry, it didn't make any difference which pastor it was or who it was. I didn't care what their name was. It didn't make any difference. They were the pastor, and they were a recognized pastor of the church. And so you need to submit. You need to understand. You need to not try to do things outside the will of God. See, just like those people up there in Ohio that were in the church and tried to do things on their own, they got themselves into trouble. They didn't get themselves into trouble with me because I never said a word to them. But they got themselves in trouble with God. And God took it on, and God took care of it, and God straightened it out. So, just a word of advice. That's the way I've lived my life. And God has promoted me and taken me places that I never would have thought I would have been around the world. But again, it was His choice. I chose to go, yeah, but it was His choice to take me there. Amen. And